Hello and welcome to the AT Collective. This is Karen Marr and I'm very excited today to have Tracee-Lee McGinnity on our show. Welcome, Tracee.
Thank
Tracee-Lee.
you so much, Karen. Really excited to be here with you today. Do you want me to introduce myself?
Yes, that would be fantastic. Thank you.
So my name's, as you said, Tracee-Lee McGinnity, bit of a long-winded ring to it. I trained as an occupational therapist. I've worked in various areas, specifically seating and mobility over most of my career. And I'm now one of the clinical services specialist team members at Permobile. So doing a lot of clinical education around mobility and seating.
Which is excellent intro, but I really want to hear more about the work that you did in New Zealand as well.
Yeah, so I did start my career in New Zealand. I trained in New Zealand at AUT, so Auckland University of Technology, in occupational therapy. From there, I sort of fell into my last placement, offered me a job, which was vocational rehab. Really interesting role and a really great foundation for moving into seating and mobility because it was just task analysis. Task analysis. So really breaking down those tasks and really observing those tasks. And I think that gave me a really nice foundation for being able to work out how somebody can be best supported to mobilize. So that was a really exciting part of my career. I had done a placement in wheelchair and seating services as well. And it was something that I was quite passionate about, but I was really scared to get into it. Like back then it was like, oh, you have to have, 10 years of experience before you can touch a wheelchair, etc. So I saw this job come up and it was with Seating to Go Wheelchair Solutions, who have the national training contract over there now and do all the complex assessment under the Ministry of Health in the area that I lived. And so I saw this job and I thought, I'm just going to apply for it. I was a bit more of a mature student, been traveling before uni. So I applied for the job and surprisingly to myself got it. And that started, it just fueled my passion for mobility devices. All we did was assess for seating and mobility and at that complex level. So people that needed extra supports in the chair or needed power seat functions, needed tilt and space. So New Zealand have gone through a credentialing process and that credentialing process was implemented by Seating to Go and they run the training that's attached to it. So I was also really fortunate, Karen, to be part of the pilot program for that credentialing program. And it took me 2 years just to get through to my sort of, that first sort of level, partly because we were piloting it. So we were sort of, making sure that everything was done, but there was a lot of things to get ticked off. I had to observe so many assessments. I had to then be observed doing so many assessments. Writing up case studies. We had to really critically analyse multiple pieces of equipment and assistive technology and from multiple different manufacturers and then sort of like talk to that equipment and look at what could be achieved with that equipment. We also are very hands-on in New Zealand. So the trial process has flipped since I've moved to Australia, but essentially the therapist takes out the piece of equipment to trial. We may have the supplier help us for a head array, etc., but a foot plate adjustment, an armrest adjustment, we would do that. We'd have a full toolbox, which was really fun. We did have technicians, but one thing that we used to do that I think really gave me a good grounding and a good way to critically analyze equipment was the first time we ever used one piece of equipment. So if a new brand back came on the market, for example, and I wanted to trial that with my end user, I had to fit it to the chair first. And then the techs would come and have a look and check it. And then from that point on, every time I wanted to trial that back, the techs would fit it. But the first time we'd make our therapist do it. And then you really understand what the adjustments are, what angulation you can get, how you can get it on or off. But also we had I don't want to upset any Australians here, but we used to have, a week-long trial minimum. And so alongside that week-long trial, we couldn't get a supplier to keep coming back out. So we would go out and do any little tweaks and sort of make it work and work out what we were going to get really specific in the prescription phase, or when we were filling in the final recipe for the piece of AT. So really good foundation grounding. And I worked my way up there as a senior therapist before coming to Australia to essentially I came over to work in a custom molded seating clinic in Sydney here.
So as far as the level 1-2 credentialing,
Yep.
so anyone, just help explain it to our listeners. Obviously, we're mostly Australians here, but look, I love the credentialing system. I would love it to be in Australia, just because not everyone should be playing around with wheelchairs and think that that's okay.
Yeah.
And we don't have safeguards, like as far as safeguarding newer therapists who are told by their managers, no, you will do a power wheelchair. I feel like credentialing is an amazing system, but obviously there's many reasons why we haven't as a nation. But could you explain how it worked?
Yeah, so look, the credentialing there, you graduate university and you've maybe had 1 or 2 days, if you're lucky, depending on the school you went to, specifically around mobility bases or prescribing seating or doing a MAT evaluation. But you could leave university and prescribe a basic wheelchair. So they put in the credentialing to help protect the end user and to develop the skills of the therapy base to ensure, just like you said, that people were competent in the area that they were doing. And it's built with a lot of supervision in there. There's lots of different tasks that you do. The sort of split line between a non-complex and a complex, I think those lines have potentially blurred even more as we've got more and more adjustability within some of our entry-level equipment. So we used to sort of split out, if something came out of a box and it didn't have an awful lot of adjustment, the user wasn't using it full time for all mobility, it was used occasionally. Even things like that seat width aren't going to be as crucial as somebody who's a very active wheelchair user, completely dependent on a mobility base for all the mobility that they're doing in their everyday lives. We know with that comes potential issues of repetitive strain injuries. We just have to look to the spinal cord population. I was looking at some stats the other day that, in the normal and mainstream population, if we look at population as a big group, there's between 3 and 5% of us will experience a repetitive strain injury in our life. If you look to some of the studies that look at specific populations, such as the spinal cord injury group, we see that jump to 70% of people experiencing those RSIs. So we do know that there is significant evidence around, protecting those shoulders, etc. The other split in it was like tilt and space. Like tilt and space can be a very dangerous situation to leave somebody in because of gravity. So when I say dangerous, I'm a little bit overzealous. I'm a little bit but I know, sometimes when we walk into a school environment or, and I'm talking historically, it's not happening as much now, or an aged care facility, and we see a whole lot of people that are just tilted back and sort of, 40 degrees of tilt. Now, when they're tilted back in that significant amount of tilt, we're in a disengaged position. We're kind of looking up at the ceiling. And so what I was seeing happening quite often was that we would get a referral for a headrest. Can you please look at Mrs. Brown's headrest? Her chin's down on her chest all the time. And you'd go out there and you'd start trying to work at the pelvis and work your way out. And then you'd often find that it was actually a result of elongation of the posterior neck muscles, shortening of the front anterior neck muscles, because they've been left in significant amounts of tilt. for a duration of a
Oh,
day, wanting to
yes.
engage our vestibular system, our eyes,
Mm,
everything sort of pulls our head forwards. And that's encouraging that kyphotic posture. And then because of that change in the muscles,
mhm,
like the person didn't have the capacity always to hold their head up for time. So it would end up going back to a therapeutic base. So I'm really passionate and advocate teaching to the support people around an end
mhm,
user as well, using tilt appropriately. For some people, yes, they're going to need tilt all the time. So, you know, tilt in space where the whole seat and back goes back a little bit. And that might be because I've got sort of, you know, that low tone, etc. But it's perceived as a more resting position. So it's perceived as something that's more comfortable. So I think it's really important to educate on why we're using these power seat functions from the very beginning,
mhm,
explaining to the people that are supporting the end user why and how these features can assist with that person's attaining goals, lifestyle, and just maintaining setting tolerance and comfort. And when we empower the people that are supporting our end user and they understand why, I don't like the word compliance, but there's a lot more, you get buy-in. I think it's really important
adherence
to
on
get buy-in.
the
Yeah.
yes, yeah. And not to mention, you say tilt, but not to mention also recline. People will just use recline plus those postures, and it's like the person's just going to slide out of their chair. What are they doing?
Exactly, exactly. But if you don't know, you don't know what you don't know, right? So that's
Yeah.
why I think it's, you know, it's something I've always really valued about that OT role is that we're not just the prescriber. And sorry, I know there are potentially some listeners that are going, I'm the OT, I'm not the prescriber, the supplier is the prescriber.
Oh.
But I think that that came out of some of this choice and control language, and we are the prescriber.
Mm-hmm.
We're the expert on the end user. And sorry, I'm putting myself back into the therapy role here when I
Yes.
say we, but you know, the people out there that are working, the primary clinician
Mm-hmm.
is actually the prescriber. The word prescription sounds like you're doing something, you know, you're ordering somebody to do something. I think of it more as like the recipe of how things are going to go together to get the best cake you can, you know, putting all those pieces together. And that's a little bit of a collaborative affair when it gets to that point, because we don't necessarily know or the capacity or what can be done with a particular base, with a particular brand, how things fit together. That's a great place to sort of discuss that through with the supplier. But at the end of the day, if we're signing off those reports, then it is our prescription still. Sorry, I just went on a little soapbox there, Karen.
And I often use the word recommendation, but at the end of the day, the point is who's responsible. Like
Yes,
that's
yes.
that's really the point that you're saying is like when I recommend this $50,000 wheelchair, I'm responsible to make it work for the person. Even though initially stuff might not go quite right, it's still my job, my role to own that.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah, sure. Well, can you tell us something that many people wouldn't know about Tracee-Lee?
Um, there's probably lots. No, and I don't know. It depends, I suppose, if they know me on social media. But I love making cakes.
Mhm.
I love making cakes that are three-dimensional, and I think that like as my get older, I was trying to think of a nice way to say how I'm getting older. But as I get older, I reflect back on what one of my mentors said to me. Very early in my career, and she said, you're going to make a great seating therapist because you can think in 3D. And it never made sense to me. Never made sense at all. That she was like, you know, you think and you see in 3D. But meanwhile, I was making these 3D cakes where you sort of sculpt up, you know, you bake the cake, you
Wow.
cut it
Yeah.
up and you make it. And so the last big one, well, I did a baby shower one this week, but the last big cake I did was I actually did a replica of a Permobil chair for Owen. Which was a lot of fun, and something that I was quite proud of. I went back to the cake supply shop and was showing them little photos because I was
And
quite
then
proud of
that's
it.
on socials?
It's on my socials, I think, potentially. I can send you a photo of it.
Yes, that sounds awesome. Well done. That's cool. So where did your journey start for you?
So my journey started on, you know, I'm a good old Kiwi, us Aussies and Kiwis like our OEs, our overseas adventures, or overseas experiences, if I get the acronym right. So I sort of, I left New Zealand to explore the world, and I spent a little bit of time as a nanny, and then I saw these American summer camps. And I talked through with a few people, and I didn't want to go to a private camp because I got told that you'd be treated like a housekeeper and that the kids would just throw stuff on the floor and you'd be running around. And I was like, nah, not into that. And I was like, wait a minute, maybe a camp with kids with disabilities would be quite rewarding. I don't know much about disabilities, but like, I'll go give it a go. And so I actually ended up training lifeguards for Camp America all through the UK, and then going to Camp America, to a camp in New Jersey, where I was meant to go as a lifeguard. I arrived there, the other lifeguard and the head had resigned or didn't turn up or whatever, and I ended up running that whole program. And I loved it so much. So every child that we got into the water, I had to work out what kind of flotation devices they needed. Did they need one-on-one support? We had kids from inner city New York who had never been in a pool before. Oh, wow. And to me, that was mind-blowing. Yes. Like, I lived in New Zealand. Most people in Australia live on the coast. Like, water is just, like a way of life. But some of these kids had never been in water. And it was just a truly amazing experience that was the catalyst for everything else to come. So from that, I went back to London, decided to work as a support worker. Lived with another amazing young woman. She was the same age as me. She had cerebral palsy, spastic quadriplegia, and she was moving out into her own home. So I got my first little taste of what an OT could do, because now we're talking over 25 years ago, nearly 30 years ago, and she was getting a high-low bench put into the kitchen so that I could work at one height and she could assist at another height. And I was just like mind-blown. Like completely mind-blown. Worked with her and did various casual support work, pretty much to fund myself to get back to the camp again. And I did that for about 4 years before they said, okay, why don't you just stay? Let's sponsor you to get a visa. And so then I stayed and did year-round respite. So I sort of did support work in the camp through the year with children and adults, and then we doing respite, and then we ran the summer camp for kids and adults during the summer, and just the most amazing experience. Then when it was time for me to sort of like leave, come home, I was talking to the camp director, and he was like, what do you want to do with your life, Trace? And I was like, I reckon after this experience, I'm going to go study physiotherapy and I'm going to specialize in hydrotherapy. And he was like, that's really great, but what about OT? And my only experience of OT had been this bench that went up and down. I went, well, that's pretty cool. They're pretty cool, but it's kind of limited. What else do they do? And he was like, exactly what you've been doing. I was like, what do you mean? Because you take each child and you look at how and what supports you can give them so that they can do an activity they want to do. And I went, wow, this is amazing. So I applied for university and they wouldn't accept me. I was like devastated. So I did 2 of the first year papers correspondently through another university, and then reapplied back to OT, gone in the second time around. And then that was it. I was kind of like hooked into this. And at camp, we used to do wheelchair cleaning on first day. Was stripped down to get the kids to strip down their chairs and like water blast and sort of take, it was fun. It was kind of gross, but it was fun. And so I was always kind of fascinated with all the components of the chairs. But the biggest thing of all was seeing how people could get around and gain some independence in the wheelchair. And that sort of sparked my first passion of mobility bases, which is then something that I sort of stalked out through university and my early career.
Sounds like it was meant to be. And so obviously mobility bases, wheelchairs, things like that is your passion, but now you're in education. So what is it? What's your why that gets you out of bed each day? Why do you do what you do now?
Yeah. I am very much an end user focus. I think that we've claimed being client-centered when we haven't always been client-centered in the profession. But when you're truly client-centered and that's what drives you, that's kind of, oh God, I'm going off on a tangent, I think, a little bit there. You said what gets me out of bed, right? Yeah, so that sort of like drives me. I worked out, like, I used to have so many good stories and so many great experiences, and seeing great outcomes was really, really important to me. But I could have a maximum, I think when I was senior, my maximum caseload was about 30 clients at one time when I was working in the complex seating service. And I kind of got to a point where I went, hey, I can help 30, I can have an influence on 30 clients' lives at a time, or I could talk to a room full of 30 therapists who would all have 20, 30, 40 clients. And so to me, it felt like I was giving back more. I had such amazing mentors. They made it not so complicated. So I'm quite passionate about trying to not dumb it down, but make it understandable. If you truly understand the assessment process and like how to work through to get to that best outcome, and you follow that process, it's not as complex as we initially think. I still remember being too scared, and I say this in most of my MAT-eval courses, that I wouldn't even touch anybody for like the first year or two in the MAT assessment. I was happy to take the notes, more than happy to do the research, find all the bases, even work through the clinical reasoning, but I didn't have the confidence to go, okay, yeah, that's a flexible obliquity and we're going to put a bill. Like, if my mentor said that's a flexible obliquity, sure, okay, so I'm going to put a build up here first and I'm going to try that, I'm going to do this, and I could talk through all those steps, but I was scared that I would call that an obliquity when it wasn't, or I would call that initial diagnosis of that posture wrong. And then when I sort of finally started to get hands-on, I realized that the more you do it, the less scary it was. So I'm very passionate about people being getting best outcomes by following best practice, and by following best practice doing something like a MAT-eval. I think we do a MAT-eval for every single person that has a seating and mobility AT requirement. We may not do a full MAT-eval, but we're at least hopefully getting them out of their chair and measuring them, and that's part 3 of the MAT-eval. So I think that we are always needing to do at least a component as part of best practice. So did that answer you? Or did I just start rambling?
No, it's good. And like you're saying, you can reach more people when you have your skills, your experience, your stories, and you can amplify your impact.
And I just want people to be confident to do it, because I remember what it was a bit scary at first, but when you get your hands on, when you get in there, when you follow through the process, it's not as scary. So,
but I guess what you're also describing is you had amazing mentoring. You had someone in the room. I'm assuming they were in the room with you.
Absolutely.
And I think that's something that's so critical with wheelchairs in particular, is you have to touch the person. And telehealth is scary when it comes to people saying they've done things through telehealth, which was out of necessity through COVID. But wheelchairs is just one of those areas that you should be there in person to do your assessments. And I don't know how you can do a good job unless you are.
I agree 100%. Like, I get photos daily, or definitely weekly reports through. I've zoomed in on assessments, but I can't feel it.
I know, I've done the same. I tried
the end feel.
I know, I've tried telehealth, and it's like, I don't feel safe because I can't validate what I'm saying as a supervisor. I'd rather be there in person. So if you're saying that, then I'm happy that it's
absolutely. And the other bonus I had was being part of a service where we were all in an open plan office, and we would talk all the time. There were conversations going on all the time. Have you tried this particular chair? What did you like about it? What didn't you like about it? Have you adjusted that? Have you ever put a backrest with that chair? Have you ever thought about, and you would hear some of the most amazing stories. And I see that in education too, that people really love the case studies that we bring. Like
Mm.
usually any comments are around the stories that we tell. And I think that that's a really important part of developing your clinical reasoning skills. You know, we come out of uni, and I remember saying to my anatomy teacher, actually, like, you know, I'm the student that almost failed anatomy and kinesiology and physiology the first year so badly that in the second year I got the most improved award. Yes, go
Yeah, well
Tracee.
done.
And that didn't take much because I was so bad in the first year. But I do remember saying to my anatomy teacher when I finally passed, I was like, you know what? I still don't get it 100%, but at least now I know where to find it in the textbook. I know how to you know, like to seek out some of that information and to get some support and work out what's going on. I said, and I feel like now I can at least reach the light bulb by putting, you know, standing on my anatomy textbooks, and I'll be able to turn it on one day. Like
Yes.
I'm still reaching. So yeah, I think.
And so as far as you said, case studies and examples is the thing that people really resonate with. Is there some kind of story you have that's like your most rewarding piece of AT, or story that you have an example of a person whose lives were changed because of the things that you were able to help them with?
I actually have problems with this question, Karen. The reason being is there's so many. There's just so many that my mind, and you already see how fast I speak, like everything sort of like comes back to me. There's just so many. And for lots of different reasons. I mean, every time you get a good outcome, when you see somebody gaining more independence, independent function, seeing even somebody that's non-verbal and what society might think of as not very functional, being able to support them to sit upright so that they can engage and see around them in their world. You know, I get feedback from that even. I often tell the story about the youngest client I ever put into power. So she was 9 months old at the time that we did the first assessment. She had arthrogryposis, so joint contractures, so a lot of limitations in her movement. Her legal custody was with her grandmother, and her grandmother had a back issue and was struggling to lift her. And this little girl was like, oh, she was an adventurous little poppet, and she could roll around quite well.
Yeah.
And so we were sort of trying to problem solve. They wanted the chair before she went to kindy, and now 9 months old, this little one. So
When you're saying kindy, are you talking about like 5-year-old kind of?
Like preschool kind of,
Okay.
yeah,
Yes.
like
Yeah,
3 to around 3 over there. They sort of start there, and we knew that it could be a long process, because like what I clinically decided would be best for this family was something that she could get into herself so that Nan didn't have to lift her up and get into it. Also something that she could move around herself in, that she could be at the level with her peers in. And ironically, this was way before I worked for Permobile, but ironically it ended up being a Permobile chair, the only one of this chair that I've ever scripted, because the seat comes down right down to the floor level, and so you could roll into it, shuffle backwards, and then using the controller take herself up and go off where she needed to. So to me, it was really rewarding on 2 levels. We were helping Nan to keep that carer burden limited, but it was also enabling this little girl to get around. Now, at that point in time, anything over 20,000, God, doesn't that sound cheap? Anything over 20,000 had to go to the Ministry of Health for sign off. And I do remember this little girl was going to be featured on Attitude TV, a local TV show. And so I rang the professional advisor, and I was like, look, so-and-so is going to be on TV tonight. If you want to see her, you should watch the show. And then I watched the show and my heart just sank, because the eligibility criteria at that point in time was essential indoor mobility. So to get a power base, you couldn't move a manual chair, essentially.
Mm.
And then if you get a power base and you could get a manual backup in case something went wrong with the power that was pushed, but you shouldn't really have, that was sort of the defining line between the AT levels. And as I watched this show, she was in the little manual backup that I'd already got for them, and she was pushing around on the front quarter of the wheel. So really fast, like sort of like one arm. And it was a really unfunctional push, but it was a functional push because it was moving her around. And I just sat there and I went, oh no, I've told the PA, the professional advisor, to watch this. And I still remember that phone call the next day. And I was like, did you see it? And she went, yeah. And I went, it's not very functional though, is it? And to my delight, the professional advisor was a very good one. She had lots of experience, and she could see what we were trying to achieve, and it helped her to submit on her report to the next level. And so that was funded. By the time she was 18 months old, we had it funded in place for her.
Yeah, brilliant.
So and I talk stories like that all day.
Yeah, and so the lives changed.
Absolutely. That's the one. The one thing I didn't think about when I got into wheelchair and seating though, Karen, is I got in it because I understood that it could really enhance somebody's life. It could really give independence. I didn't think about the fact of end of life. I didn't think about things like progressive conditions. And I had a very, very high caseload when I was a senior therapist with clients with motor neuron disease. And that can be quite hard to take on. And that's another reason I think that we really need to have good mentors and good supervisors around us, people that we can talk through stuff with, especially when you're so much towards independent and living life and quality of life. We don't always think through how we can regulate our own emotions, etc., when something the outcome's different to what we expected.
Yeah, and we often talk about living well and ending life well as well. We do support a number of people with progressive conditions, palliative care, and it's like, live life each day the best you can each day.
Absolutely. And I find that obviously much easier now as I'm older, but as a new grad, it was kind of like, whoa, I hadn't even thought about that I'm going to get attachment on some level, or this therapeutic relationship's going to get, quite solid. And then I'm going to lose that person. And it's different to discharging somebody when somebody passes. So
definitely. But what a privilege that we can be there and to help support people through things that they haven't seen before. And I know we've seen other people, but every story is different. You can never say, oh, we've seen this, you can do this. It's like, that's not how palliative care works. It's what's there for you.
Absolutely. And even, I have actually been to a couple of funerals in my career, but in New Zealand, that we have some cultural things going on. And I remember going to one funeral and the chair was there. And it kind of threw me, and they wanted to bury the chair too, because it was it really opened my eyes to how important that chair had been and why I was still part of that support network around that individual, because there we would hold the cases. NDIS is, we're seeing a slightly different sort of domain at the moment, but hopefully we are starting to see people going back to a regular therapist to get their reviews. But in New Zealand, the government also fund annual reviews on everybody's equipment. So you would see somebody every year, so that relationship sort of continues on throughout your time working there. And it also ages you when you suddenly realize that this young adult going off to uni, you gave them their first chair, or you worked with them. You didn't give it to them, you worked with them to find out what they wanted when they were 5. And now they're off to uni. It's like, oh, okay.
So I'm guessing there's times when challenges come along for you and for the people that you're supporting. How do you overcome challenges when things don't go to plan?
Yeah, that's a really good question, Karen. It's taken me a long time to realize that you don't have to have all the answers, that you don't always have all the answers, and also on when to call it. When am I chasing my tail and running around in circles
Mm.
versus, okay, let's stop, take a step back, maybe even reassess. Like quite often, especially if I'm mentoring a therapist out there and they sort of seem to be really caught up, sometimes I'll be like, okay, let's just go back and do a mat. Even if they did a mat evaluation in the first place, why don't we go back and you look at these ranges? Maybe that's what's having an impact. And I love getting the emails a couple of weeks later going, hey, we went out to that appointment and we tried that. And what we talked about, we tried that didn't work. But then I worked out that this would work. And you see that clinical reasoning process evolving. And I feel so empowered that that therapist has gone out on their own and empowered, have sought out some, some support first, but is really doing the best by that end user and finding that resolution. So guiding through, stopping and talking to colleagues myself, like I think I'm the distractor in the office. I like to talk, but it also helps me to sort of, place things where they need to be, and compartmentalize what's important and try and let go of what's not.
And it sounds like it can be a part of everyday life when you're working with complex seating and positioning and wheelchairs.
Absolutely. Like,
So maybe don't be surprised, like it's just
yeah,
part of the process.
and we live with individuals. So even with Matt Val, I'll say, okay, so from this, I might be aiming for symmetry so the postural symmetry of the individual, but then I'm going to start letting go of that for function. So it might be my starting point is this, like, oh yeah, okay, these are all the foundation rules of seating. This is where we have to start. But then due to the way somebody individually functions, for example, you might let go of something. I don't know if you know this either about me, but I do wheelchair rugby classification.
Oh, brilliant.
So, yeah, so we do the sort of muscle testing and that, and then we work out what grade somebody should be or what class they should be to keep the sport fair. And one of the things that, like, as you're working through that process, you realize how many trick movement, like, having not worked in a spinal acute, I started to see all these trick movements. Same with Duchenne's muscular dystrophy boys, like how they can push their shoulder into a backrest, gives them momentum sometimes to lift their arm when they're starting to lose strength in the upper extremities. And I love that, trying to work out, like, okay, well, what muscles have you recruited, or how have you managed to overcome your impairment to be able to use different muscles or do a task in a different way? And how can we support that and provide potential solutions that will increase that as well? So I get quite passionate about that too.
Which is very scary when you go, I'm just going to do a straightforward wheelchair and I'm going to take away that thing, whether it's it might be an armrest, a push handle or something. And the push handle is literally supporting them to do the functional thing, not just, and you go, well, seating wise, it should be this, but you've got to look at the function and how they use it in their everyday.
Absolutely. That holistic, that's what I think I love the most about wheelchair and seating as well, is that it's that big holistic nature. And then it's not just the chair, it's, like how it integrates with other things. Worst mistake I ever made, well, no, there's probably lots of mistakes I've made, but I remember when I was working in the custom molded seating clinic, and we had one client who we'd been working on a really complex mold. Of course it was a Friday. Of course it was a Friday afternoon. Of course my tech was about to go home for the day. And the wheelchair van pulls up and we're like, we've made it, we've got it on, we've got a temporary cover, let's transfer him back in. I walked him out with his support worker to their van. The hoist came down. She pushed him towards the hoist platform, and I just went, no. I could see he was not going to fit through the door of the van, through the back door. And it was just one of those, why did nobody ever give me this measurement? like this is a crucial sort of part. We went back into the workshop and we had to shave down underneath the seat, the bottom of the cushion as much as we could, while still making sure we hadn't taken off enough that he was going to bottom out under his sacral area in ITs, and so shaving it back, and then being able to make sure that he could get home and be safe for that weekend, so that we could do the full problem solving the following week. And so I think that, yeah, that's but we learn from our mistakes too. And as long as nobody's harmed from those mistakes, it is just, and is it a mistake or is it part of the process? I think, you know, we're working through a process, especially in that very complex side of stuff.
And so do you have any role models or people that have helped you on your journey?
So many, and in different ways. From end users, a rugby player came into university and spoke to us, so like that inspired me in terms of wheelchair rugby classification, etc. I love listening to end users at conferences, etc. as well. I think, you know, telling your own story, I can't tell their stories, they're the experts in their stories, and I love hearing those. From a professional perspective, like landing a job at Seating to Go Wheelchair Solutions was the biggest growth ever in my career, because I went in there so green, and left there just feeling so empowered and so excited about the roles of wheelchair and seating. So Debbie Wilson, definitely like one of my biggest mentors as well as friends. And so based on that, I'm going to give her and Rachel McDonald a quick plug. And if you want to learn more, if you're a wheelchair and seating nerd like myself, OSS is coming up in Melbourne this year. We can always talk about that a bit later. But so yeah, Debbie Wilson definitely influenced me significantly. And another trainer that was employed there, Deborah Bowditch, or she used to be called Deborah Duffield, another amazing clinician from Wales. They really gave me the confidence in myself. They gave me all the foundation skills. So inspiring. When I moved to Australia, so Debbie Wilson's actually from Sydney and moved to New Zealand and has done more than any other person for wheelchair and seating in New Zealand. And I said to them when I left, I was like, if I can do a quarter of what you have done for, like in Australia, of what you've done for us in New Zealand, my life will be complete. Like, I just had so much admiration for her. You know, I talked about the credentialing pilot projects that we did for credentialing, but she also, I remember a time way before sleep systems were ever funded, but we were seeing all the evidence coming out of the UK on the importance of 24-hour postural management. And so Deb actually sort of said to us all, like, how does the funder know what needs to be funded and what the users need if they don't see it? You don't know what you don't know, kind of thing. So she said, every time you identify like somebody that would benefit from 24-hour postural management, I want you to include it in the report, knowing you're not going to get it funded. But okay, cool. And from that, essentially, I think the Ministry of Health might have contacted Deb because she was doing all the training stuff, and like, why am I getting all these like requests from your therapist for stuff that is not part of the funding criteria? And from that, she managed to get a pilot project going. And from the pilot project, Enable New Zealand started funding 24-hour postural management for children just before I left New Zealand. And then I think within a year of me being in New Zealand, or 2 years, they'd moved that up to the adult population as well. And I've been here like sort of 12 years now. So, you know, I hear us talking lots about 24-hour postural management now, and that warms my heart too, because I am a supporter of looking at that holistic big picture.
And so as far as some lessons that you'd like to share for someone who might be interested into moving into this space, besides, I mean, you could go to New Zealand to get the training, and you know, maybe that's a thing that some people might be interested in. Is there a system like that in Australia?
It would cost an awful lot because the government subsidise it for the prescribers like under there. So you could go to that. We're seeing more and more sort of MAT training and wheelchair and assessment training, 24-hour postural management training here in Australia as well. I think just seize on the opportunities, but know your own learning styles as well. Some people have become very fatigued from online learning. If that's you, then seek out a face-to-face or get together with a group to discuss a webinar that you saw afterwards so that you're actually getting some sort of interaction. There's online courses, there's face-to-face courses, there's blogs, there's so many different ways that you can inspire yourself and learn more around that.
And like you said, the Oceanic Seating Symposium's coming up in Melbourne. Is it November?
Yes, it is.
And you presented at ISS?
That's correct. So ISS, so there's the International Seating Symposium, and that's been going, I think this was 38th one, and every second year. So they've been going, and I don't know when they went from second to first. So it's been going for many years, like longer than I have. So I'd identified wanting to go there, like back in New Zealand as a young therapist, and various jobs along the way. I'll put in little submissions. Do you want to support me to go to ISS? I finally got to ISS in, I think it was 2014, 2015. So it's been like about a 10-year goal to get there. And then when I got there, I decided I was going to talk at that one day. And so then I set myself a goal that one day I'm going to present at ISS. I was fortunate enough to get accepted last year as one of the team members. So myself, Rachel Fabiniak and Rachel Mayer, we all came together and we did a presentation, but it was online. And, to me, it had been about going there, going to America or Canada, because it used to flick between America and Canada each year. And I was so excited, but we did it online. So I kind of ticked the box, but I didn't feel like I'd achieved my goal. And I was very humbled and honoured to be able to go back this year and do a in-person presentation myself, where I talked a little bit about the NDIS and how you sort of get decisions reviewed. And we looked at 2 case studies that sort of just highlighted both the amazingness that we can see out of the funding of NDIS and some of the systematic issues that we've been seeing with some participants accessing NDIS. So that was a big tick goal for me. I won't tell you any more about it because I might submit that one for OSS. I was going to say submissions are still open, but they won't be by the time for OSS. But if you do have a goal, I guess, you could always start at something like an ATSA if you wanted to present.
And that's, that's May 2023, so about to happen when we're recording. But
as we're recording, the big ATSAs are happening, but there's also Canberra this year. Canberra is often like a smaller one, but it's still achievable to get to from Melbourne. We'll probably all go to Melbourne ones, but for some of the New South Wales therapists that want to get a day of seeing a lot of stuff under one roof and some education, can travel down. So there's actually quite a few conferences and things this year. Now that the world's opened back up, I think a lot of things that have been on hold for a couple of years have now opened. So been doing a lot of travel at the moment, Karen.
Great.
Spreading
the word. All right, top 3 lessons you'd like to share?
Top 3 lessons I would like to share. Where do I start with that? I'm just going to see. Do I have to put them in the right order?
No, there's no right.
Listening, and not just listening, like actually hearing what an end user has to say. I think that mismatch of AT is when we haven't actually actively listened to what they're saying, and what's really important to them. That would be lesson 1. Lesson 2, empowering all the support people around that person, like what we were saying earlier. by doing that, you're also empowering your end user, and by listening, you're empowering your end user, and just acknowledging you don't have to have all the answers, but make sure that you've got like networks around you, supports around you that can help you find the right answers. You know, they may not have the right answers either. People will ring me and say, oh, like, what do I don't have all the answers, but we could have a conversation, and between us, like, some of that information is probably going to help you to find that right answer. So, you know, make the most of those around you, the ones that you trust, experience. If you don't have a supervisor, if you are not working with a more senior therapist in your organisation, reach out. I know you do a lot of like online training bits and pieces as well, with Capable Spaces. I love following some of the stuff that you guys have been doing. So there's opportunities out there to engage within the profession, even if you are a sole trader. I guess also one of my pieces of advice would be, although the NDIS is there's all these jobs that we see advertised, you know, don't rule out a hospital rotation, especially if you're like a new grad. It can give such a beautiful foundation of experience. You can start developing some of those networks, and that's going to make your career much more enhanced.
Yes, yeah. Good foundations is really important, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. Is there anything you'd like to tell us about what you're doing with Permabil in the near future, or anything, how people could get in touch with you?
Yeah, look, they can reach any of our team at education.au@permabil.com. We provide clinical education predominantly to therapists, but also to end users and people involved, all the stakeholders, also to some of our suppliers and dealers, because we're sitting at that manufacturer level. Excuse me. What else are we doing? This year we've launched pathways. So we have clinical pathways. So we've tried to sort of have 3 different streams so that people can identify their own learning objectives and fit into a stream that they feel is going to best give them the education that they want. I get kind of devastated when somebody comes up to me and goes, oh, I've been to 5 mats and like, you know, now I understand it. If it wasn't part of their learning process, all good if they went to 5 that like was just taking a step each time. But that mismatch, like when you go to a workshop and it's not what you thought it was going to be because those objectives are different. So really look at the objectives, make sure they meet your own learning goals, because we're all individual. Make sure the format matches how you best learn, whether you're a visual, if you know, audio learner is great for things like podcasts, you know, hands-on kinetic learners, like you want to get in there and be doing something. So trying to find a variety of different learning styles. So the clinical pathways, we can do some of them online, but it is, we do try and put in practical activities at the end that really help you to consolidate your information and get hands-on and feel it. And we talk very much about the features, not specific brands where within our programs, because our programs are also, you know, as a global company, some of them we might be sharing information back to the US, who have to get it accredited for CEUs for ongoing professional development there. We also have Asia Pacific, where again, some of the courses have to be validated before they can be delivered to healthcare professionals. I love looking at all the research and getting it there. So we do all this education. So I'm going on my bandwagon. We do education here at head office. We go out to therapy groups. So if you are a therapy group or there's a group of you, you can reach out to us to come and deliver. If you're an independent, we try and update our website each month. We replay some of our old webinars from and through our on-demand, and we just rotate those around. So there's different ones each month. We support therapists with right through that whole funding process. So, we might have a discussion with somebody before an assessment if they're a bit nervous. We might have a discussion with somebody between an assessment and a trial to just help them think about things that they're going to do at trial to get the evidence, because that's where we see the most denials happening, is when the therapist hasn't necessarily articulated the evidence in the way that the agency requires it. So we support in that. Unfortunately, a therapist usually comes to us once they've had a denial, whereas I think it's way better to be proactive, work out what you need to get at that trial, what kind of tasks do you need to do to demonstrate evidence, what is the actual evidence. It's not just photocopying 20 research articles and attaching it. There's a few more levels and layers than that. But I always find it really satisfying when you've got a therapist that is really staunch in their clinical conviction. No, I've assessed this. This is what this end user needs to be able to meet this goal. And how can that be articulated? Because I think sometimes as well, when we're working with an individual, we get to know them so much, right? It's like when you try and proofread your own work, your own report, and you don't see that spelling mistake 20 times because you wrote it. So I think, sometimes just we know so much about the end user because we've got quite involved and we've done like so much work with them, that we forget that the person reading it, or we don't consciously acknowledge that the person reading it has maybe never met the person before in their life. And so just, giving that really good picture.
Well, for a very, very busy lady with all the hats that you're wearing, I really thank you and appreciate you for coming on the podcast today and sharing some more of your wisdom and knowledge with our audience. So hopefully we'll see you at OSS at the end of the year. And thanks again, Tracee-Lee, for being on the podcast today.
Oh, no, thank you so much. I love what you're doing to support our community of therapists, and it's always a pleasure catching up with you. So thanks so much for the invite, and definitely let's catch up at OSS. Perfect. If not before.
Yes, sounds great.
Thanks, Karen. Bye.